During dinner, I allowed myself to disagree with my mother-in-law, and my husband immediately slapped me across the face. I gathered my things and left. I had barely walked out the door before I did something that sent my husband's entire family into a total panic. The devastating blow from the person I shared a bed with happened right in the middle of a family dinner. It didn't just break 2 of my ribs. It completely shattered 3 years of humiliating patience, playing the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law, clutching my aching chest and tasting the blood on my split lip. I didn't shed a single tear of weakness. Calmly, I gathered my 5 most important possessions, offered a bitter smile, and proudly dragged my suitcase out that door. Just 15 minutes later, the piercing wail of police sirens tore through the silent night, echoing through the upscale Lincoln Park condo building we lived in. That was the moment my precise legal counterattack took effect, kicking off days of sheer panic for my husband's entire family and forcing my abuser to pay the ultimate price. It was Chicago, during the bitter, freezing days of late February. The wind howled outside the windows of our 15th-floor apartment. Inside, the silence was so heavy you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. The dinner on the table was still steaming, but my soul had grown cold a long time ago. Over 3 years in this strange family, I had grown used to such bitter meals. My mother-in-law, Teresa Parker, sat at the head of the table. She picked up the best slice of pot roast, generously smothered it in gravy, and placed it on the plate of Luke, my husband. She smiled affectionately, insisting her boy eat more to keep his strength up for work. Then she turned to me, and her gaze instantly changed, becoming cold and cutting. She slammed her fork onto the table with a clatter, cleared her throat, and started her usual rant all over again. It was the same topic that had haunted me for 1,000 days. She clicked her tongue in disgust, reprimanding me because, after 3 years of marriage, my stomach was still flat. She said that in other families, daughters-in-law quickly provide grandchildren, but into her home, they had brought a dead tree that bore no fruit. She complained to my father-in-law, Joseph, that this was a disgrace to their bloodline. Relatives from downstate were constantly asking, and she felt embarrassed, not knowing what to say. I lowered my head, hurriedly forcing the tasteless mashed potatoes into my mouth. There was a lump in my throat. Lately, I had tried everything: home remedies, fertility supplements, you name it. We had been to the best specialists at Northwestern Memorial. The doctors concluded that both of us were perfectly healthy. It just wasn't our time yet. Luke knew this, but he always remained silent when his mother attacked me. Luke was a coward who always put his mother first. In his eyes, a son's duty trumped a wife's pain. Today, my mother-in-law's reprimands were especially venomous. She even brought up my parents, who lived in rural Indiana, just to cut me deeper. She said they didn't know how to raise women, seeing as they raised a daughter who couldn't even get pregnant. That was the last straw. I snapped back. My patience has reached its limit. I bought this condo with my own savings before the wedding. The monthly household expenses are covered by my salary. Yet I live in my own home like a criminal. I put my fork down, lifted my head, and looked directly into my mother-in-law's eyes. I enunciated every word clearly. Having children is our business, mine and Luke's. You shouldn't interfere so much, Teresa. My words were like a match thrown into a powder keg. Teresa's eyes widened like saucers, and she slammed her hands hard onto the table. She screamed at me, calling me an insolent brat who dared to talk back to her mother-in-law. Joseph, sitting next to her, also frowned, shaking his head and accusing me of being disrespectful. At that moment, Luke leaped from his chair. It all happened so fast I didn't have time to react. He lunged at me and, with all his might, slapped me across the face. The blow from an infuriated man was so strong that I lost my balance. I stumbled backward, slipped, and fell. My left side slammed hard against the sharp edge of the solid oak dining table. I heard a dry crack, and a sharp, piercing pain shot up from my chest to the top of my head, blurring my vision. I hit the cold hardwood floor, clutching my side and fighting for breath. The metallic taste of blood seeped from my split lip, mixing with the salty taste of the tears I swallowed. The family dinner had officially turned into a battlefield, and I knew it. This marriage was over. The cold floor burned my skin, but it was nothing compared to the ice that took over my heart. I lay there curled up, agonizing over the unbearable pain of broken ribs. the sound of shattered dishes on the floor mixed with Luke's heavy, panting breath. My mother-in-law stood up for a moment. Fear crossed her face as she saw me writhing in pain. But soon, the wicked expression returned. She pointed her finger at me, justifying her son's brutal act out loud. She yelled that if a wife is insolent, a husband has every right to teach her a lesson. She even threatened me, telling me not to dare put on a theatrical performance in her house. Luke stood over me. His eyes were bloodshot. There wasn't an ounce of remorse in them as he looked at his fallen wife. Instead of helping me up, he pointed at the floor and ordered me to get on my knees immediately and apologize to his mother. He said that to protect his mother's honor, he was ready to kick me out of the house. I didn't cry. My tears of weakness had dried up during long, lonely nights long before this. Instead of screaming or begging, I offered a crooked smile, a bitterly extreme, yet absolutely clear smile. That slap, that fall, had helped awaken all my senses. They shattered the fake shell of peace I had worked so hard to maintain for 3 years. I looked closely at the face of the man who once swore to love me forever. Now, I only saw a coward weak and cruel. I saw the true face of this marriage. I couldn't sacrifice my youth for this heartless person for another second. Suppressing the sharp stab of pain that came with every breath, I grabbed onto a chair and slowly pulled myself up. My legs were shaking, but my back was perfectly straight. I didn't look at them once. I turned around and, with slow but firm steps, walked to our bedroom. I slammed the door shut and locked it, leaving them stunned in the living room. Time was now precious. I grabbed a small carry-on suitcase from the top of the closet. The pain in my side pierced through me in waves, making me break into a cold sweat. But my mind was sharper than ever. I opened my desk drawer and gathered exactly 5 items that from now on would define my life. First, the deed to this apartment, registered in my name and bought before the wedding. Second, my passport and other important documents. Third, a silver flash drive. On it were all the videos from the living room Nest camera, capturing Luke breaking dishes, pushing me, and throwing me to the floor in the past. I had prepared this weapon in secret a long time ago, waiting for the right day. Fourth, my debit card and some cash. Fifth, a few comfortable clothes for the next few days. I zipped up the suitcase and put on a heavy winter coat. When I opened the door and walked out, my mother-in-law was standing right there with her arms crossed. She smiled with sarcastic disdain. She loudly proclaimed that, if I was so brave, I could just disappear with my little bag. And since I was leaving her house, I should never dare come crawling back begging to be let in. Luke was sitting on the couch with his back to me, an aura of icy indifference about him. I gave them one last look. My father-in-law had remained silent the entire time, not saying a single word in my defense, and this was in a family that prided itself on being decent and educated. I gripped the handle of my suitcase tightly and walked out the door, leaving behind a dark past that I was determined to erase forever. The biting draft in the hallway hit my face. I pulled up the collar of my coat, clenching my teeth to suppress the pain in my left side, which was gradually spreading through my whole body. Every step, every deep breath felt like 1,000 needles in my chest. Yet, my feet moved with purpose. The wheels of the suitcase rolled across the granite floor, producing a cold, dry sound exactly like the marital feelings that had just shattered inside me. I got into the elevator and leaned my back against the cold mirror. In the reflection, I saw a woman with a swollen cheek, marked by fingerprints, with dried blood in the corner of her mouth. I looked awful, but my eyes burned with determination. Descending to the deserted lobby, I found a discreet corner near the building's entrance, shielded from the wind, and with trembling hands, I pulled my phone from my purse. My fingers were freezing, and with difficulty, I dialed my lawyer's number. Robert Hayes was an excellent attorney and a former college classmate of mine, a year older. I had secretly contacted him 6 months ago after a previous episode of Luke's violence. Back then, I was still hoping to fix things and only asked for a consultation just in case. But today, I needed his real help. The phone was answered almost immediately. Robert's voice was calm and professional. I tried to take deep breaths so my voice wouldn't shake from the pain. I briefly informed him that Luke had just assaulted me and broken my ribs. I had already left the house. I asked him to immediately activate the emergency plan we had discussed. First, I wanted to call the Chicago Police Department directly, specifically the Domestic Violence Unit. I wanted to file a report for felony domestic battery. All the evidence from the home cameras was with me, with remote access via my phone. Second, and this was extremely important, I asked him to immediately prepare the paperwork for the bank to freeze our joint savings account first thing the next morning. There was over $300,000 in it. It was money I had saved by cutting back on expenses from my own salary over several years. Luke hadn't contributed a single cent, but he was listed as a joint owner. I couldn't let them take and claim that money, earned with my blood and sweat. And lastly, I asked him to immediately file for an emergency restraining order. I knew the nature of domestic tyrants well. When the victim escapes, they get enraged and try to seek revenge or stalk her. I needed the protection of the law to guarantee my safety over the coming days. Robert listened intently to every detail. He expressed his outrage at the cruelty of my husband's family, but maintained the cool composure of a lawyer. He advised me to get an Uber immediately and head to the largest hospital in the city to receive medical attention and document my injuries. He promised to take care of all the legal formalities that very night. As I hung up, I looked up at the 15th floor. The warm, yellow light from the apartment windows was still on. They were surely celebrating their victory, thinking they had kicked the stubborn daughter-in-law out onto the street. Little did they know that Luke's reflexive slap had just triggered the most powerful counterattack I had ever prepared. I was no longer a victim who could be trampled on with impunity. The car drove me away from the condo building, and about 15 minutes later, my phone started vibrating nonstop. They were messages from Mrs. Valerie, my next-door neighbor and the president of the HOA. Mrs. Valerie was a kind woman, and whenever she visited, she vaguely noticed how my mother-in-law oppressed me. Through her frantic texts and short video clips, I could picture exactly what was happening at the place I had just left. Everything was going exactly as planned. According to Mrs. Valerie, shortly after I left, a CPD cruiser pulled into the complex with its sirens blaring. The sirens pierced the quiet night, making hundreds of residents peer out their windows. 2 uniformed officers, along with a plainclothes detective, went up to the 15th floor. They knocked on the door with very serious expressions. The door was opened by my mother-in-law, still arrogant at first, haughtily asking what the officers wanted. When she heard there was a domestic violence report and that Luke had to go to the precinct for questioning, her face went from red to dead white. She started stammering, defending her son, saying it was just a normal couple's argument, some harsh words, not an assault. However, the officers were uncompromising. They asked for Luke's ID and ordered him to come with them. Only then was Luke truly terrified. He came out of the bedroom trembling. Not a trace of the fury he used to hit me remained on his face. In front of the curious neighbors who had stepped out into the hallway, the officers handcuffed Luke for safety protocol and led him to the elevator. Seeing her precious son being taken away in cuffs like a criminal, Teresa Parker completely lost her mind. All the fake civility she had built so meticulously evaporated. She ran down the hall, fell to the floor, and started writhing, crying, and wailing. She pounded on the neighbors' doors, cursing fate and calling me a traitorous bitch who had locked up her husband. But in response, she only received cold stares and slamming doors. Everyone knew Teresa's difficult temperament and how she treated me. The events were so sudden and humiliating that Joseph, my father-in-law, couldn't handle the shock. He already had heart and blood pressure issues, and clutching his chest, he collapsed in the living room. Thanks to Mrs. Valerie and a few neighbors who called 911, paramedics rushed up, stabilized him, and urgently transported him to the hospital. Sitting in the backseat of the Uber on my way to the ER, I read those messages without a shred of pity. Less than an hour after that fatal slap, the family that took so much pride in its traditions, honor, and reputation was completely destroyed. The chaos they were currently in was the price for years of complicity with evil. I asked the driver to drop me off at the emergency room entrance of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The ER at night was packed, smelling of antiseptic and echoing with the constant wail of ambulance sirens. I dragged my suitcase to a corner, leaning against the wall to stay on my feet. The pain in my side was growing more intense. Every slight cough felt like a knife to the chest. An ER nurse approached me upon seeing my pale face and the dried blood on my lips. I explained that I had fallen, hitting my side against a hard object, and was having trouble breathing. The nurse quickly brought a wheelchair, helped me sit down, and rushed me straight to trauma triage. The attending doctor was an older man with a calm, serious gaze. He carefully lifted my shirt to examine me. He barely touched the swollen, purple skin on my left side, and I couldn't hold back a groan. The doctor urgently ordered an X-ray and an abdominal ultrasound to check for internal bleeding. The wait for the results was the loneliest time. I watched other patients being comforted and cared for by family members, and I looked down at my own cold hands. But I immediately shook off that useless self-pity. Tears wouldn't solve anything. I needed to be strong to walk the thorny legal path ahead of me. Half an hour later, the doctor called me back into the examination room. He pointed to my chest X-ray on an illuminated screen. The diagnosis was confirmed. I had closed fractures on my 6th and 7th left ribs. The surrounding muscles were severely bruised from the heavy impact. Fortunately, the broken ribs hadn't punctured my lung, but I needed immobilization, strong painkillers, and absolute rest for at least a month. The doctor sat at his desk and picked up a pen to fill out my medical chart. He gave me a sympathetic look and gently asked about the cause of the injury. He asked if I hadn't been in a car accident or fallen down the stairs. I straightened up. I took a deep breath, casting aside the shame that victims of domestic violence often feel. I answered coldly and resolutely. I asked the doctor to clearly record the cause of the injury as an assault by my husband, who pushed me against a wooden table. The doctor paused for a moment, but then nodded understandingly. He wrote it in the medical report with clear, legible handwriting. Every letter the doctor wrote was priceless to me. This medical report, stamped by a major hospital, stating in black and white that the cause was domestic violence, would become ironclad proof, the most solid legal foundation for the prosecution. Luke thought that behind closed doors he could do whatever he wanted and no one would know. But he was wrong. I would drag all his crimes into the light and make him pay before the law for all the physical and emotional pain he had caused me. After they wrapped my ribs and gave me a prescription, I painfully walked out of the trauma bay, holding my side. Even late at night, the hospital was bustling. Gurneys were rushed down the hallways, bringing in the chill of the night wind. I was heading toward the main entrance to catch a ride to a hotel, but fate seemed determined to test me one more time. Passing by the cardiac waiting area, I stopped. Through the glass door, I saw a familiar scene. My father-in-law, Joseph, was lying on a stretcher with an IV in his arm. His face was pale, his eyes closed. Right beside him, leaning over the edge of the bed, was my mother-in-law, Teresa. Her hair was a mess. Her coat unbuttoned, she looked nothing like the arrogant woman who had berated me at dinner just hours ago. Teresa lifted her head, and her eyes accidentally met mine. Her eyes filled with pure hatred. She immediately stood up, shoved the door open, and charged at me like a predator after prey. She raised her hand to strike me, just like her son had. She gritted her teeth, cursing me, calling me a walking disaster, an evil witch who wanted to put her husband's family in the grave. But I was no longer that submissive daughter-in-law, who endured humiliation in silence. I took a step back. My gaze was as cold as a dagger aimed right at her face. My merciless stare made her hand freeze midair. I articulated every word clearly and crisply so she would grasp her current reality. I informed her that Luke's in my joint bank account was already frozen at my lawyer's request. All withdrawal operations for our $300,000 savings had been immediately suspended. That money was mine, earned with my sweat and blood. She and her son wouldn't get a single dime. Teresa's face went from red to dead white again. Her jaw dropped. Her hands trembled as she grabbed the doorframe. But I didn't stop. I threw another bucket of ice water on her delusions. I demanded that she and Joseph pack their bags and move out of the 15th floor condo within a week. That apartment has been registered in my name since before the wedding. It is my premarital asset. Protected by law. I will not allow the people who assaulted me to continue living comfortably in the home I bought. Finally, I reminded Teresa of the nearly $75,000 she had secretly begged and borrowed from me over the last 2 years under the pretext of helping out relatives, but had never paid back a cent. I made it clear that I had saved every text message and wire transfer receipt as proof. If she dared to use force or defame me again, I would press charges for fraud. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving my mother-in-law paralyzed in the middle of the hospital corridor, her eyes wide with horror and fear. I had barely managed to drag my suitcase through the hospital's sliding glass doors when my phone rang in my purse. It was Robert. The night sky was pitch black. The bitter wind kept blowing. I found an empty bench under an awning. I sat down carefully so as not to agitate my ribs and answered the call. Robert's voice was very serious. He gave me shocking news. Luke was being held at the precinct, giving his statement. However, his family was pulling strings, trying to post bail so he could fight the charges from the outside. The sickest part was that Luke was using the excuse that his wife was pregnant and needed her husband's care, hoping to elicit pity and leniency from the detectives. Hearing the word pregnant, my ears started ringing. A chill ran down my spine, and the hand holding the phone began to tremble. Memories from a few days ago came back with staggering clarity. At the time, I had been feeling weird nauseous, with a late period. I bought a pregnancy test and took it early in the morning. The test showed 2 faint lines. The heart of a woman who had dreamed of being a mother for 3 years leaped with joy. Carefully, I wrapped the test in toilet paper and threw it deep into the bathroom trash can, deciding to go to the doctor that weekend for an ultrasound to confirm before telling my husband. But Teresa Parker, with her nosy, intrusive nature, had dug through the trash and found the test. I thought maybe she hadn't understood what it was, or if she did, that her attitude toward me would finally change for the better. I was horribly wrong. The truth revealed by my lawyer's words pointed to something monstrous. The mother-in-law had secretly told Luke beforehand. That meant today, at dinner, when Luke lunged at me and hit me so hard I crashed into the table, he was fully aware that his wife was carrying his child in her womb. Luke knew I was pregnant, and he still raised his hand to me. He valued his cruel mother's false pride more than the life of his unborn child and the safety of his wife. That truth was so unbearable that my chest felt like it was going to explode. I hugged my stomach tightly, and hot tears streamed down my swollen, bruised cheeks. I wasn't crying for this rotten marriage, but for the tiny life inside me. It had chosen the wrong place to come into the world. It couldn't be born into a family where the father was willing to beat his pregnant mother. It couldn't grow up under the toxic influence of such a wicked, treacherous grandmother. I wiped away my tears, gritted my teeth, and suppressed the agony tearing at my soul. In that dark night, I made a painful but firm decision. I would terminate the pregnancy. I would rather carry that heavy burden alone than allow my child to be born into sharing this tragic fate with me. The next morning, the sky over Chicago was gray, and a cold, fine drizzle was falling. Despite the agony from my broken ribs that had kept me up all night, I took an Uber from the hotel straight to the SVU precinct where Luke was being held. Attorney Robert Hayes was already waiting for me at the entrance. He took my suitcase, a look of deep compassion crossing his eyes as he saw my exhausted face and my bandaged torso. We entered the precinct and met with the detective leading the case. The detective offered me a chair and placed a cup of warm water on the desk. He reviewed the medical report, the x-rays, and the hospital-stamped domestic violence evaluation I placed on his desk. In the detective's eyes, I could read surprise, mixed with respect for my calm and clear demeanor. I opened my bag and took out the silver flash drive containing all the evidence. I asked the detective to turn on his computer and plug it in. On the screen appeared the video from our living room camera from the night before. The crisp image and clear audio captured the entire scene. How my mother-in-law humiliated me, how I responded with restraint. And the most terrifying moment when Luke, like an enraged animal, lunged at me, and his blow threw me against the table. The sickening thud of the impact echoing from the speakers plunged the room into a tense silence. The flash drive didn't just have this video. It had dozens of other audio and video recordings of Luke breaking dishes and screaming at me over the past year. I detailed the dates and circumstances of each incident. I stated that Luke's violence was systematic, recurring, and becoming increasingly brutal. The detective nodded as he typed up the report. He praised my careful preparation and evidence gathering. This evidence was irrefutable. Luke's actions, combined with the medical report, went far beyond a simple domestic dispute. It had all the elements to be prosecuted as felony domestic battery, under strict domestic violence laws. The official investigation was open. The door to a jail cell was slowly swinging open, waiting for the domestic tyrant. After I gave my statement, the detective informed me that Luke was insisting on a 5-minute meeting with me. Robert advised me to refuse to avoid psychological manipulation, but I shook my head. I wanted to personally cut the final thread of hope for that vile man. I walked into the small visitation room. Luke was sitting on a wooden chair in the corner, rubbing his hands nervously. He looked nothing like the confident man in his corporate suits. Now he looked pathetic, with a messy stubble and sheer panic in his eyes. When he saw me, he stood up, then fell to his knees on the cold floor, covering his face with his hands and starting to sob. The familiar performance of repentance began. He blamed stress at work, the alcohol, a moment of blind rage where he supposedly just wanted to separate me from his mother. He swore he would change, that we would move out on our own, that he would give me his entire paycheck. He begged, in the name of our 3 years of marriage, that I drop the charges and save him from prison and losing his job. I stood with my arms crossed, watching his performance with icy indifference, as if he were a stranger. I unmasked his disgusting charade. I asked him directly if he knew from his mother that I was pregnant. Luke froze. His sobs caught in his throat. His eyes darted back and forth, avoiding my gaze, which was as sharp as a knife. That facial expression was more eloquent than any verbal answer. I took a deep breath. I firmly announced the decision that sent Luke into a total panic. I told him that tomorrow, I was signing the consent forms to terminate the pregnancy. That baby would never be born. Hearing this, Luke's fake remorse evaporated. His eyes bulged, the veins in his neck popped, and he pointed his finger at me, showering me with curses. He called me a cruel, cold-blooded murderer who was willing to kill her own child just to get revenge on her husband. His selfish, violent nature flared up again. I didn't flinch at his fury. I took a step forward, bringing my bruised face close to his. I answered coldly. Every word I spoke cut like a razor. I told him that his brutal slap last night had already killed that child. A man who knows his wife is pregnant and assaults her anyway permanently forfeits his right to be a father. With that, I turned and walked out, without looking back at the broken man screaming in despair. Leaving the precinct, Robert drove me to a luxury corporate apartment complex across the city in the West Loop, far away from my old home. Using his connections, he had helped me rent a secure studio for a month. It had a reliable multi-level keycard security system and 24/7 concierge, ensuring no one from my husband's family could find me or harass me. I dragged my suitcase into the new apartment. Inside, it was clean, quiet, and cozy. The decor featured warm wood tones. I locked the door, throwing every deadbolt, and collapsed onto the soft living room couch. Only then, alone in the silence, did my feigned bravery dissipate. The pain in my broken ribs returned with full force, making me clutch my chest and struggle to breathe. I boiled water myself and took the strong painkillers the doctor had prescribed. I took off my heavy coat and, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, applied ointment to the deep bruises on my cheek and lip. Looking at my exhausted reflection, I didn't cry anymore. On my first night in this new place, my body was battered, but my soul felt a strange, light relief. The suffocating atmosphere, the reprimands, the dirty looks, all of it was behind me. Late that evening, my phone rang. It was my boss. Surely the rumors about the scandal in my family had reached her. Her voice was warm and attentive. She didn't pry into my personal life but was direct. She told me to rest and take my time to recover. The company would approve an extended paid leave of absence, citing my medical documentation, so I could sort out all my affairs. She also added that if I needed help with medical bills or finding the best lawyers, the company and our network would always back me up. The humanity at the workplace where I poured my energy and talent sometimes proved warmer and more sincere than the fake familial bonds I had just severed. My boss's words of support became an invaluable pillar, giving me confidence for the difficult legal battle for justice that lay ahead. My second night in the safe apartment passed in profound silence. Outside, the drizzle continued, cold drops sliding down the glass. The temperature on the streets had dropped drastically. The freezing Chicago air felt like it could cut skin. I picked up my phone from the nightstand. It was 8 p.m. It was time to talk to the people closest to me. I opened FaceTime and called my parents back in rural Indiana. After a few rings, the screen lit up, showing my mother's tired but loving face. Behind her was the familiar 3-bedroom house with the shingled roof in the countryside where I was born and raised in boundless love. My mother smiled widely when she saw me, but her smile vanished instantly. The glow of the screen illuminated my face, highlighting my swollen, purple cheek and split lip. My father, sitting at the table behind her, rushed to the screen. The former military man's eyes widened in shock. He slammed his fist on the table. His voice trembled with anger and pain. Who dared do this to my little girl? My mother started frantically wiping away tears with the corner of her apron, constantly asking, Where are you? Does it hurt much? How did this happen? Seeing my parents' tears, the wall of bravery I had built over the last 2 days crumbled. I cried for the first time since Luke knocked me down. I allowed myself to be weak. The tears flowed uncontrollably, burning the cuts on my face. Through my sobs, I told my parents everything from my mother-in-law's humiliation at dinner to Luke's slap that broke my ribs, and the fact that I had called the police. After hearing my story, my father turned red with rage. He gritted his teeth and declared he was getting in his truck right now and driving up to Chicago with my brothers tonight. He said he was going straight to Joseph and Teresa's house to settle the score and demand justice to see just how fearless that family was, daring to beat someone else's daughter until her bones snapped. My dad declared that even though we weren't rich, we would never allow our daughter to be treated like an animal. My dad's anger was understandable. It was pure protective instinct, but I hurried to calm him down. I wiped my tears and tried to speak calmly and clearly. I told my parents that I had already taken care of everything, that I had the best lawyer, ironclad evidence, forensic medical reports, and video recordings. The law would punish him to the fullest extent. If they came up now, it would only complicate things, and if a fight broke out, our family would be the ones getting in trouble. My mother, still sobbing, convinced my dad to calm down and listen to me. She told me to eat well, take vitamins, and drink milk so my bones would heal faster. She said if I was alone, she would catch a Greyhound bus up to take care of me. With a bitter smile, I declined. I didn't want my mother seeing me in this state or risking run-ins with my husband's family. I asked my parents to believe in me and send me strength from afar so I could extinguish this hellfire myself. With the solid support and unconditional love of my family, I felt a warm fire heat my frozen soul, giving me the strength for an uncompromising fight. The next morning, I woke up as the first pale rays of winter sun pierced through the curtains. The pain in my side had subsided a bit thanks to the strong meds. I was getting dressed to go with Robert to the clinical forensic evaluator when my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered. On the other end was a middle-aged man who introduced himself as Michael Sterling Esquire, the attorney representing Luke's family. His tone was polished, polite, but with underlying notes of superiority and calculation. Attorney Sterling started with pretty words, expressing deep sympathy for my injuries. He claimed that arguments between husbands and wives were common, that Luke had simply lost control for a split second, but that deep down, he was a loving husband. Then began the psychological warfare. He advised me to think about our 3 years of marriage, the reputation of both our families, and suggested settling the matter peacefully. Sterling made a very tempting offer. He said, "The family of Joseph and Teresa Parker is willing to cover all your medical expenses, plus pay you $100,000 in cash for emotional distress immediately. In exchange, you just need to sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop the criminal charges so Luke's record remains clean." I sat on the sofa in silence, listening to his polished lies, and felt nauseous. They thought they could buy my dignity, my health, and my self-respect for $100,000. They thought a slap that shattered my ribs and years of emotional abuse could just be wiped away with a stack of bills. I took a deep breath and firmly rejected all his sweet-talking arguments. I told the lawyer directly that the law is not a flea market where his clients can haggle. I refused any form of reconciliation or payoff in exchange for dropping the charges. I declared that my only goal was to take this case to criminal court and ensure the abuser received the punishment he deserved for his brutality. I also called out his strategy and warned Sterling not to waste his time calling me again. All negotiations would go strictly through my attorney, Robert Hayes. When I hung up, I put on a warm coat and went downstairs. Robert was already waiting for me. We went to the court-approved medical examiner for the official documentation. The evaluation was highly professional. The experts reviewed all the hospital records, measured my bruising, and carefully analyzed the x-rays of my broken ribs. The examination room was cold and smelled of alcohol. I patiently complied with all the doctor's requests. The official report was ready by lunchtime and perfectly aligned with Robert's predictions. The severity of my injuries was classified as significant bodily harm, fitting perfectly into aggravated domestic battery statutes under the law. That report became the decisive blow, a one-way ticket to a solid criminal prosecution against Luke. Every bribery attempt, every psychological trick from my husband's family was crushed by irrefutable scientific evidence. Earlier that week, I had decided to stop by my office to hand over my ongoing projects before my official leave started. Even though my boss had told me to rest, I was responsible by nature and didn't want to leave my coworkers hanging. I wore a baggy turtleneck sweater to hide my orthopedic brace and a face mask to cover the swollen half of my face. I had been sitting at my desk for about 15 minutes when the internal phone rang. The frightened young receptionist informed me that an elderly woman claiming to be my mother-in-law was causing a massive scene in the lobby, accompanied by a man in a suit. They were demanding to be led up to my floor. I instantly knew Teresa Parker and her slick lawyer hadn't given up. I calmly told the receptionist to have security, hold them in the lobby. I would come down myself. When the elevator doors opened, I was met with a sickening spectacle. Teresa was sitting on a lobby sofa, dabbing away theatrical tears with a tissue. Security guards and a few employees were gathered around. Seeing me, she immediately raised her voice. She started screaming, playing the role of the tragic, abused mother-in-law being victimized by a wicked daughter-in-law. She shrieked that I was ungrateful, that I was committing elder abuse. She fabricated a wild story that I had thrown myself against the table on purpose to frame Luke, lock him up, and steal all his assets. She wailed tragically that I had heartlessly gotten rid of their baby out of sheer spite, depriving Luke of fatherhood and them of a grandchild. The lawyer beside her kept nodding, validating her blatant lies. Whispers broke out around the lobby. Some people, not knowing the truth, looked at me with suspicion. If I were the same woman from 3 years ago, I would have crawled into a hole out of pure shame. But that woman died after that fatal slap. Slowly, with absolute self-control, I walked right up to Teresa. I didn't justify myself or yell. I opened my purse and pulled out the thick document bearing the official stamps of the police and the medical examiner. I held it up right in front of Teresa's face and her lawyers. In a loud, clear voice that echoed across the marble lobby, I announced the truth. I informed them that this was the forensic evaluation of the severe injuries caused by her son. I warned them that showing up at my workplace, spreading malicious rumors, and slandering my character were crimes punishable by law. I immediately picked up my phone and loudly requested that building security provide me with the lobby surveillance tapes so I could attach them to a new police report for criminal harassment and defamation. Hearing the words police report and harassment, Teresa's fake sobs choked off abruptly. She gasped. Her face went pale. Attorney Sterling's expression also dropped. He tugged on her sleeve and whispered something sharply. Realizing their blackmail had failed and they were facing new charges, Teresa stood up awkwardly. She shot me one last hate-filled glare before she and her lawyer practically sprinted out the revolving doors. I thanked the security guards and calmly stepped back into the elevator, leaving behind the admiring stares of my coworkers. Their psychological warfare had failed yet again. On Thursday morning, the sky was still blanketed in thick gray clouds. I put on a long winter coat and took a cab to a women's health clinic. It was the day I had to execute the hardest, most painful decision of my life. The sterile smell of the clinic hit my nose, and my stomach tied in knots. In the waiting room, there were couples holding hands, husbands gently supporting their pregnant wives. That happy image contrasted sharply with my complete isolation. I filled out the paperwork for a voluntary termination of pregnancy. In the consultation room, the doctor, a middle-aged woman, looked at my chart and then up at my bruised face. She asked with deep empathy why I had decided to give up the baby at 5 weeks. I sat in silence and slowly told her my story. I didn't hide that I was the victim of brutal domestic violence. I showed her the medical reports. I told her that my husband had beaten me, knowing full well I was pregnant. I explained that I couldn't guarantee a safe, healthy environment for the child. I didn't want my child growing up witnessing abuse, or worse, becoming a victim of his paternal family's toxic, violent mindset. This decision, though devastating to me, was the most humane thing I could do for the baby. The doctor sighed heavily. She had seen many tragedies, but my story clearly moved her. Following protocol, she referred me to a pre-procedure counseling session. The counselor, a woman about my mother's age with incredibly warm eyes, spoke with me for nearly an hour. She completely understood and supported my choice. She squeezed my hand tightly, telling me that a mother's safety is the absolute priority. Forcing a woman to give birth in a violent, life-threatening situation is the real crime. The medical staff's compassion eased the pain in my soul just a little. I went back to the attending doctor. The consent form lay on the table. One signature, and I would forever lose a piece of myself I had yearned for over 3 years. I closed my eyes, mentally picturing the tiny life. In my thoughts, I begged for forgiveness. Forgive me, my little one. For failing to choose a good father for you, I am letting you go so you don't have to suffer in this dark world like I did. Go to a place of peace. I opened my eyes. All my doubts vanished. I signed my name with a firm hand. That cold signature closed the most agonizing chapter of my life and paved the way for a powerful rebirth. After the procedure, I spent a few hours in recovery before heading back. My body was completely drained. The pain in my side combined with the post-op cramping made every step agonizing. I ducked into a quiet corner cafe to get a hot ginger tea. Sitting alone in a booth, I suddenly heard the sound of a cane tapping the floor. I looked up, and my heart skipped a beat. My father-in-law, Joseph Parker, walked into the cafe. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a matter of days. His hair had gone completely gray. His face was hollowed out. He leaned heavily on his cane. He had obviously tracked me down somehow. His eyes found me, and he slowly hobbled over to my table. He sat down across from me. All of his former imposing presence was gone. He started begging me, calling me his daughter. He cried, asking for forgiveness on behalf of his wife and son, and then cut straight to the chase. He clasped his wrinkled hands together and begged me to keep the baby. He said it was his only hope, his bloodline. He promised he would make Teresa apologize to me publicly. He even offered to sign over their summer cabin in Michigan to my name if I would just have the baby and drop the charges against Luke. I took a sip of my hot tea, looked directly into his old desperate eyes. My voice sounded firm and cold, completely devoid of emotion. I told him he was too late. I clearly stated that the procedure had been done that very morning. The baby was gone. Like a lightning strike, Joseph's hands dropped to the table. His cane hit the floor with a clatter. All the blood drained from his face. He stared at me in sheer horror. I didn't comfort him. I brought up his own cruel silence over the past 3 years. I reminded him of the countless dinners where his wife humiliated me, and his son broke everything in sight. He was there, yet he stayed silent. His silent consent enabled the evil. It turned Luke into a monster. I emphasized that his apathy, his obsession with family reputation over a human being's safety is what led to this finale. My decision today was just the harvest of what the 3 of them had sown. Hearing these undeniable truths, Joseph broke down, covered his face with his hands, and began to weep. Tears of regret fell onto the table, but his remorse was utterly useless now. After returning to my apartment, I locked myself in, recovering my strength. I thought Luke's family, after such humiliation, would just stay quiet and wait for the trial. But I underestimated my mother-in-law's vindictiveness. When they realized that neither money nor begging would make me drop the charges, they struck the lowest possible blow to my reputation. One quiet morning, my cousin texted me a link to a post in a massive local Chicago Facebook group. The main photo was from my wedding with Luke. The post was written by Alice, Luke's cousin. The headline screamed, "Exposing a snake in sheep's clothing." In a massive wall of text, Alice played the concerned cousin of her good-hearted brother who was being framed by his vicious wife. She fabricated a narrative that I was a gold digger who constantly humiliated my mother-in-law. The pinnacle of her lie was the claim that I had thrown myself against a table on purpose to frame Luke for battery, lock him up, and steal all his property. And the cruelest part, she broadcasted that I had gotten a cold-blooded abortion just to exact revenge. Guided by Teresa's twisted mind, the post was peppered with tear-jerking, fake details. It spread across local networks with insane speed. Thousands of people, completely ignorant of the truth, started dragging me in the comments. They called me heartless, a demon incarnate. Some even tracked down my personal profile and sent death threats. Reading it, I felt a suffocating anxiety. I couldn't believe people I had shared meals with could twist reality so vividly. Robert called me immediately. He begged me not to read anything and not to reply. He said any justification right now would be pointless. He suggested having the post notarized to file a cyber harassment and defamation lawsuit later. He told me just to hold on until the trial. But I disagreed. I had held my tongue for 3 years. I wasn't going to stay silent now. I told my lawyer I was taking the fight to them. I would extinguish their wildfire of lies with the blinding light of truth. I opened my laptop. The pain in my side seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. They wanted to destroy me on the internet? I would use it to rip their masks off. I wrote a post on my own page, no tears, no cursing, just a calm, mature, factual tone. I confirmed that the post was about me, but I systematically dismantled every lie. I stated that all my actions were entirely legal, designed to protect my life and dignity from severe domestic violence, not frivolous spite. In the second paragraph, I attached the ironclad receipts. First, a scanned copy of the forensic medical report, where it clearly stated I had sustained 2 fractured ribs due to blunt force trauma from an assailant. Second, screenshots of my bank statements over 3 years, showing all my cash transfers to Teresa Parker money she never returned. That destroyed the gold digger narrative entirely. And then, the kill shot. I uploaded the raw, uncut video from the living room Nest camera. Anyone could hear the mother-in-law's abusive rants, see my restrained behavior, and most importantly watch the exact moment Luke, like a wild beast, attacked me. The sickening sound of the blow was the ultimate proof of his brutality. Regarding the baby, I wrote only one short, agonizing sentence. No mother wants to give up her child, but I would rather carry this pain for the rest of my life than allow my baby to be born just to be beaten by their own father before they even take their first breath. I hit publish and shared it directly into the same massive group where they had defamed me. In less than 15 minutes, the narrative did a complete 180. The video shocked everyone to their core. Public outrage violently shifted direction. Thousands of people realized they had been manipulated. They flooded Alice's original post with furious comments. People who had cursed me yesterday were now apologizing and expressing awe at my strength and evidence gathering. Large news blogs and women's advocacy groups began sharing my story. It became a viral discussion regarding the reality of domestic violence. The social pressure became so immense that a panicked Alice deleted her post and scrubbed her social media entirely. But the worst consequences fell on Luke. My boss called me. The corporation Luke worked for was massive and highly protective of its PR. When the video exploded online, their HR department called an emergency meeting. That very afternoon, Luke was fired for gross misconduct and being involved in a violent criminal scandal. My precise counterattack had completely decimated their fortress of lies. Almost a month had passed since I left that suffocating condo. My ribs were healing nicely. Luke's criminal trial was scheduled for the following week. According to Robert, Luke had been out on bail after his father drained his savings to post bond. One freezing winter evening, I went to a Whole Foods to grab some groceries. In the pasta aisle, I suddenly felt someone staring at me. I turned around. 10 feet away stood Luke. I barely recognized him. He looked dreadful. His previously perfect corporate haircut was grown out and greasy. His face was gaunt, covered in a ragged, unkempt beard. His clothes were wrinkled and hung loosely on his shrinking frame. The old arrogance was entirely gone from his eyes. There was only fear and a pathetic plea. Seeing me look at him, he hurried over and blocked my path. His voice was hoarse and shaky as he called me his wife. He humbly begged for forgiveness. Right there, in the middle of the grocery store, he whined that he had lost everything: his job, his friends, his family's respect. He said his parents were physically ill from the shame. He swore he would give me every penny he had left, that he would walk away with nothing if I just dropped the charges. He said if he went to jail, his life would be completely over. I stood there, arms crossed over my chest. In my soul, there was no pity, but no real satisfaction either. Just total disgust for a man who couldn't take responsibility for his own actions. I looked him dead in the eyes and offered a crooked smile. I told him his money was already legally frozen as mine, so he couldn't offer me what he no longer owned. I told him his current pathetic state wasn't my fault. It was the direct result of his own cruelty and his toxic upbringing. Karma is real, Luke. What you're experiencing right now is just a tiny fraction of the pain you caused me and our unborn child. Finally, I spoke with absolute finality. There will be no settlement. I'll see you in court next Wednesday. With that, I stepped around him and kept walking, leaving the coward standing frozen in the middle of the aisle with a look of absolute, crushing despair on his face. On Wednesday morning, The sky over Chicago was surprisingly clear and bright. I put on a sharp black tailored suit, did my makeup lightly, and walked into the Cook County Courthouse with my head held high. Robert Hayes walked right beside me. Inside the courtroom, a solemn silence reigned. I took my seat on the victim's bench. Across the aisle, huddled in the corner, was Luke's family. Joseph leaned heavily on his cane, coughing weakly. His face was a sickly gray. Teresa shrank into her shawl, not daring to look up. Luke stood before the judge, physically trembling as he answered questions. The contrast between the strong, independent woman seeking justice and the utterly destroyed, once arrogant family spoke volumes. Luke's defense attorney tried to present mitigating factors: his lack of prior criminal record, his previously stellar employment history, his family's standing. He practically begged for probation. But Robert immediately and vehemently objected. He presented a mountain of evidence proving the violence was systematic and escalating. The climax was the irrefutable proof of his assault on a pregnant woman. The evidence was bulletproof. After deliberation, the judge read the sentence. His voice was stern, thoroughly condemning domestic violence and emphasizing the cruelty of the crime and the severe physical and psychological trauma inflicted on the victim. The court sentenced Luke to 6 months in county jail. On the civil side, the judge granted every single one of my requests. An immediate, fault-based divorce. The condo remained solely my property. The $300,000 savings account was legally recognized as my exclusive funds. On top of that, Luke was ordered to pay restitution for all my medical bills and a hefty settlement for emotional and physical damages. The bang of the judge's gavel put a definitive end to it all. In the gallery, Teresa broke into loud, ugly sobs. Joseph dropped his head onto his cane. The bailiff stepped up and handcuffed Luke. Before being let out, he turned and gave me a look of immense, crushing remorse. But it was far too late. I stood up, adjusted my blazer, and shook Robert's hand. With the court's ruling, an enormous weight lifted off my shoulders. Justice had been served. Evil had been punished. I had won my freedom back. 3 days later, accompanied by sheriff's deputies, I returned to my condo. Luke's parents, heads bowed in shame, were packing their bags to move into a cheap rental apartment. When I walked in, Teresa was dragging her last suitcase toward the door. She didn't dare insult me anymore. Her eyes were terrified. She looked ancient and broken. Watching the 2 miserable seniors being evicted from their comfortable home, I felt no pity. You reap what you sow. Their wickedness and complicity had destroyed their own family. When the door clicked shut behind them, I stood alone in the empty living room. Every corner of that place reminded me of 3 years of humiliation. I realized I couldn't live there anymore. I decided to pack my things, hire a cleaning crew, and called a realtor friend to put the condo on the market. I wanted to cut every last tie to this city. At exactly the right time, a new door opened. Corporate leadership, impressed by my resilience and professionalism through the ordeal, offered me a major promotion to director of projects. It came with a significant pay bump and a transfer to our branch in San Diego, California. Without a second thought, I signed the new contract. The stunning, sun-drenched coastal city was the absolute perfect place to start over. On the day of my departure, I wore a vibrant yellow sundress. At O'Hare International Airport, my parents and closest friends came to see me off. My mother cried, hugging me tight and telling me to be safe. My father smiled with immense pride, so happy to see his strong daughter back. After passing through TSA, I walked to my gate. The plane took off, carrying me high into the sky. Sitting by the window, I looked down at Chicago, watching the freezing city grow smaller and smaller. That city had buried my youth and my tears, but it had also forged me into steel. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. A faint, genuine smile, the happiest I'd been in years, crept across my lips. The sunlight streaming through the window warmed my face. A new journey, a new life free, proud, and brilliant was waiting for me. I was ready to live it to the fullest, entirely for myself. Closing this chapter of my life, a story filled with tears but ultimately forged in pride, I learned that blind patience is never the key to family happiness, especially when they trample on your dignity. Life has a way of balancing the scales, and evil always has to pay the toll. Let this be a call to all women to be strong, to be independent, and to always fight back. Never be afraid to slam the door on a rotten situation, because only by leaving a toxic past behind can you kick open the door to a bright, free, and truly happy future.